Hey YouTube, Chris Miasma's friend here again. Today I'm bringing you guys a deck profile of the deck that I went undefeated with today at our locals. As you can see, it is CBD. For a while, CBD was definitely out of the meta, but right now he's definitely gotten a lot more new good cards that make him definitely much more prominent, and from what a lot of people are considering one of the best decks in the game right now. So, to start off the deck, my starter is Carbon. People either use this or Dusttail Unicorn. I prefer him because I think the deck locks enough on its own already. And being able to just tutor into any grade 1 in your deck for free is honestly just one of the best effects we have. Conroe, the first Kagero starter, did something really similar to this, and he got banned for just being too good. Any grade 1 in your deck you can call to the field. The only reason he's worse than Conroe is because Conroe let you add it to hand, so you could just take a perfect shield and be safe on your opponent's next turn. But either way, definitely a very prominent starter. Moving on to triggers, 12 crit really doesn't matter what crits you play, except for this card. When one of your opponent's units is locked, you can call him to rearguard circle, shuffle him back in the deck, and lock one of their back row units. Something important to note about this card is even if they don't have a grade 1, or if they have a grade 1 with resist, you can still use his effect by paying the cost, and there will just be no target if you're getting low on cards in deck, which this deck already does, hence why there's no draw triggers, or if you just feel like throwing back a crit just to try to be a little bit more pressury. And then of course, for heal triggers, you gotta play heals, saves games. I love this artwork so much, I think she just looks so good. But yeah, pretty standard trigger lineup. Moving on to grade 1s, I play 3 Limit Break Enablers. A lot of decks play less, because you really only need 1 throughout the game. Some decks actually only go 1. I personally like 3 just because if I have to ride one, if I damage check another, it's always good to have one, because this deck can really get shut down sometimes if it's left at just 3 damage, and that can kind of suck. Next up is 3 Zinc, a new card that just came out in this most recent set. Really great for the deck. She just refreshes everything you have. You put her into the soul if your opponent has a locked rearguard, and you get to unflip 2 damage, and you get to soul charge the top 2 cards of your deck. This is pretty good. Sometimes I don't really like soul charging the top 2, because I always worry about decking out in this deck because it soul charges, it draws, and it's made to play into the late game anyway, but really, if you manage your deck and your cards well enough, that shouldn't really be an issue, so definitely one of the most prominent cards. Next up, 4 Perfect Guard. You gotta play 4 in this format or you're bad. I'm playing the 4 Starvator Perfect Guards just for consistency. A lot of people like to play the Unflipper Perfect Guard, but because of Zinc, I really feel like that's not quite as needed now, because you have a card that can unflip 2 on its own. Then 2 Stride Enablers. I would definitely go up to at least 3, maybe even 4 if this card was a Starvator, but since it's not, just for consistency, I like only having 2. This deck has really never had any issues with not being able to stride for me, and if I have to pitch 2 cards, usually my hand is fat enough, so it's not that big of a cost. Then last up is 2 Vault Lines. When it boosts an attack that hits, you get to lock one of their rear guards. This is definitely a good pressure card. I don't pull off the Omega Lock with it as much as I'd like to, and for that reason a lot of people play Palladium, who Counterblast 1 puts himself into the soul to Omega Lock a card. But I do like the pressure it keeps up just depleting their hands, which is something that this deck, being super not really aggressive, kind of a more passive deck, has issues doing sometimes. So I play this guy just because I really like the pressure. Moving on to grade 2s, definitely the best grade 2 in the game, hands down, is 4 Photon. When he's called, if they have a locked rearguard, you get to lock another one for free. Pure and simple, there's no reason to not play this as a 4 of unless you can't afford it, because this card is really hard to find right now, but if you can definitely get your playset, I'd heavily suggest running them. Next up is 4 Iron, a new card that just came out. When he's placed on the rearguard circle, you counterblast 1, and you lock one of their rearguards if they have one locked already. So he's basically a Photon that costs a counterblast, but in addition, he's also an 11k attacker. I still prefer Photon to him, but this card is definitely a great backup plan. I recommend a playset of each just because this deck is played to lock, so you want to have as many cards with lock on them as possible. Last up for the grade 2s, I play 3 Colony Maker, just because this deck has so many great grade 1s in it that having just a nice way to tutor into them is really nice when it comes to Vault Liner if you need another Limit Break enabler, or if you need to get that Zinc because you're running low on Solar Counterblasts. Something to think about, if you do use her effect to get Zinc instead of just drawing it naturally and playing it or using your starter, technically Zinc is only unflipping 1 for you because she costed a Counterblast to get the Zinc, so that might not be the most effective way, but if you're really backed into a corner on resources, then using her to get the Zinc is not a bad play at all. On to grade 3s, the boss of the deck, everybody hates him, makes people salty, makes people rage quit this game, 4 Chaos Breaker Dragons, CBD. His normal skill is Counterblast 1, pitch a card, lock one of their cards, and then at Limit Break, when a card comes unlocked, you can Soul Blast 1, retire the card, and draw a card. Something important to note is this is not this is an AoE effect. This does not target the Soul Blasting to retire. So if you've used Big Crunch to lock a front row, with Resist by locking the card behind it, when that card with Resist comes unlocked, you can still Soul Blast to retire it and get advantage off of it. So definitely a really solid card. Next up is 3 Chaos Bringers. When it's placed on Vanguard, you can Counterblast 1 to lock a back row, and then at the start of your opponent's next main phase, at Limit Break 4, which is something really important to keep in mind, so you definitely want your Enabler on field if you're using this, you Counterblast 1 if they have 2 locked rear guards, and you get to ride into a CBD. So if you don't have CBD, this basically just guarantees you that you get it later on anyway. And in some cases it's more beneficial because you're getting your CBD with 1 extra soul, but if I have both in my hand, I sort of just like going straight into CBD, getting my tempo going right off the bat, so I don't have to worry about making weird plays or wasting extra counterblasts later on. Then last up, as a tech of 1 of, I'm playing 1 Garnet Star Dragon. A lot of decks that are topping right now are playing 1 to 2 of him because, like I mentioned earlier, this deck plays into the late game and it can get really low on cards. So in the late game, it can be really pressuring just to be able to say, okay, 10 cards left in deck, now I'll shuffle back 4 crits, take his mate, lock up front row, lock a back row, so you get a little bit more lock later on when you're sort of spent on counterblast and you've grinded out of your CBDs and your strides. And then on top of that, he's hitting 22k unboosted, so it's a good, consistent, big number in the late game. So for that, I definitely like 1. I don't think I would play more than 1 because he comes to my hand a lot, and I've had a couple games where I've had to just play into him instead of Chaos Breaker or Chaos Bringer, so I've had to wait a little bit to go into Universe, so I don't know, I feel like 2 would definitely get clunky, but I do really like this card as a 1 of a lot more than I thought I would. On to the Stride Zones, 4 Chaos Universe, the card that's making this deck playable again. You Counterblast 1, and you flip a copy of him. And then your opponent takes a card from their hand, and they call it to a circle locked of your choice. And that's if it's the first Stride. If it's the second Stride, then you get to lock another one. So really the ideal situation to drop this guy is if they have 1 front row and then 1 open circle, so you're guaranteed a lock. A lot of people don't like going into this first. I think it's really good because with all the grade 2s you run in this deck that let you lock, you'll probably end up locking both their front row anyway. And this just gets rid of such a big issue Link Joker had of what if your opponent isn't playing out the field, or even a lot of people who thought Retire was better than Lock, because Retire would force cards out of your opponent's hand to replace the cards that were locked. Well, now, this card is forcing cards out of their hand, and even if they're not committing, this is forcing a locked front row. Next up is 2 Big Crunch Dragon. When you stride him, or not when you stride him, just during your main phase, Counterblast 1, flip up a copy of him, and target 1 of their rear guards and Omega Lock all rear guards in that column. So another important thing to note, this is an AoE effect, so if they have a front row with Resist but a back row without it, then you can still lock that card with Resist by targeting the card behind it. So it's a really good late game card. Sometimes I actually go into him before my second Universe. It kind of all depends, but definitely a really solid card to play into. Last up, I'm playing 2 Judgment Messiahs. Ideally, 1 of these would be taken out for an Amnesty Messiah, just for the mirror match, but I'm poor and I can't afford like a $90 card right now, and I don't really want to spend $90 just for the mirror match, so something to think about is a lot of decks just go 4 Universe and then 4 Big Crunch Dragons, just so you really are always getting consistent lockdown. What I've been finding with this card is just in my late game, if I'm grinded out of strides and I just want to stride to have a pressuring body with triple drive, this is usually why I go into him. If not, though, I'm usually just pitching him off for stride, or for G assist fodder anyway, so definitely not the best of all cards. I do hope to be taking him out in the future, but yeah, that's basically the deck. It was really consistent today, definitely made a lot of the other players salty, but it definitely does what it's supposed to do, so tell me what you think.